So consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so you may be mature and complete, lacking in nothing. That's how James started out his letter. The first verse, he says who he is and who he's writing to, which is basically churches everywhere. And then he jumps right into this. And so let's do the same thing this morning. As Mark said, I'm Kurt Wise. If you haven't been attending here regularly, you might not know that. If you're joining on Zoom for the first time or watching online, you may not know who I am. But I'm Kurt Wise, and I live with my wife in Kelowna. I noticed in the bulletin this morning that my wife Dawn and I share the same wedding anniversary as Ron and Susan. So the Wises and the Wises chose the same day to get married. Take note. We've been married for 37 years, have 3 adult children, and so that's kind of where we are. We live in Kelowna. We run the grocery store there. And then I fill the pulpit at a variety of churches that either do not currently have a pastor or have a pastor who needs to be gone for whatever reason on a given Sunday. And so they ask if I can come and fill in for a week. But this verse, consider it pure joy when you face various trials. Really? Really? Consider it pure joy. Do we? Do we look forward to trials? Are we happy about them? Are we thrilled to be tested? Right? You know, if I look at this, and if it's a sin to not do what the Scripture tells us to do, then this one verse probably makes me the greatest of sinners. Because I don't always consider it a joy when I have a different trial. It's not something I look forward to. And a trial is an attempt to learn something about something by proving, experimenting, or testing. That's how the dictionary defines it. An attempt to learn something about something by proving, by experimenting, or by testing. And these trials, they attempt to find things out, and it can be good to know. Right? We may not like the process of the trial, but a trial can be good to know, to get things tested. But we don't like to be tested because we don't like to fail. Right? Anybody here like to fail? No, I didn't think so. I hate to fail. Right? And we tend to look at a trial or a test as a pass or a fail. And it might be, but sometimes it's just to determine what we're made of, what we have. If you have a jug of liquid and a campfire, you kind of want to know if that liquid is gasoline or water. Right? If you're trying to put out the fire, you want to know which it is. And if you're trying to start the fire, you want to know if that liquid is water or lighter fluid, or if you're old school, maybe gas, right? It depends if you like to live on the edge or not. But it's important to know, and not knowing can have really bad consequences. And so we test things. And as we test all sorts of things, right? We test our basements to find out if they have radon. Right? I'm sure some of you have done that. We test our well water to find out what's in it. Even if you don't have a well, your water is tested by either the city or by the rural water that brings it in. And they're tested to make sure that they can be used for their intended purpose. All sorts of tests. We have tests to get a driver's license. Virtually everybody in here, with maybe a few people down in front here, have taken that test. Right? We've taken the test to get the driver's license because we want to make sure that everybody that's operating a motor vehicle does so in a safe way and understands the rules of the road. Right? It's just, when they don't, we get upset with them, right? When that guy is driving like a maniac, we get upset. When he cuts us off in traffic because he's not being courteous and following the rules of the road, we get upset with him. Even the Amish understand this. I was driving one of my Amish employees to work, and she said, "You'll never guess what happened in church yesterday." I'm like, oh, this ought to be good, right? I'm thinking, well, maybe it was communion and someone spiked the grape juice. Right? I mean, I'm trying to think, what could it have been that I would never guess? Maybe they were using the lot to select a new preacher. Maybe someone that I knew announced their engagement. Or maybe someone was excommunicated. I'm trying to figure out, what will I never guess? And so finally she said, you know what happened? They gave out Iowa driver's license manuals in church yesterday. I said, what? I said, what's with this? And she goes, you know what? She goes, the bishop has noticed that since we are driving with rubber tires on our tractors, and since so many of us have e-bikes or even regular bikes, he's concerned that we don't know the rules of the road. And he thinks it's important that we follow the rules of the road and know when we get to an intersection who has a right-of-way and whatnot, so we don't cause an accident. So even the Amish, although they don't take the test, they are still trying to learn. But, that driver's license test, there's in a group this size, there's always some people who failed the test, right? But that's not fatal, right? That failure is not fatal. It just indicates that maybe we didn't know the rules of the road well enough. Maybe we didn't understand how our car operated well enough. We had problems, the ones of us are a little bit older, shifting and getting started without stalling it, right? Especially if it was on a hill. And so, what did we do? If we failed the test, we went back and we studied some more. It wasn't the end of the world. There's no one that says, oh, I failed my driver's test. I'm never going to be able to drive for my entire life. We don't do that. We say, okay, I'm going to go learn some more and try again. And we do it. We might feel embarrassed about it, but it definitely is not fatal. And so we study, we take the test again, and quite likely, we actually know more and might be better drivers than those who never studied but managed to pass the test without studying. And when you go and you get your driver's license, they test your eyesight. And I don't know if you're like me, you always wonder, wonder what they're going to say about my eyesight. Right? But they want to make sure that your vision is good enough for you to operate a car safely. And think about other tests. If those of you who fly, not yourself, who someone else flies it would be a little bit nerve-wracking to get into a plane, not knowing that pilot has undergone extensive training and testing. Testing not only to know what all the knobs and instruments are, testing in the basics of gravity and thrust and lift and drag. Also, he's been tested that he can or she can make quick decisions in a crisis in a good way. So if there is a power failure or a decompression or a fire, they've been trained to quickly analyze situations and make good decisions, and they're tested for that. And so all these tests really, they're designed to show what we don't know, not what we do know. When I went and I got my eyes checked, I don't know if I've shared this here before, but I thought my eyes were fine, so I went to the eye doctor, and he says, cover up your left eye and read the chart. So I covered up my left eye, and I went right down the chart, all the way down through the bottom. It was a piece of cake. He says, now switch eyes. And so I covered up my right eye, and I started laughing. I said, you changed the chart, didn't you? And then he started laughing. He goes, no, what can you read? And I said, well, there's an E, because those of you, E is always the first answer. All right? If you're ever in doubt, E. Okay? So anyway, so I'm driving home that day, and as I'm driving home, I'm like, I didn't know that I couldn't see. And I'm driving, I'm going, I can read that sign fine. I can't read that sign. I can read the sign. I can't read the sign. The whole way home. I was just amazed because the test showed me what I didn't know. I went to an audiologist. I was having some problems with my left ear, I thought, and I wasn't hearing as well as I wanted to. So I went to an audiologist, and they gave me a hearing test. And I didn't know what I couldn't hear until the audiologist says, "You've got severe hearing loss in your left ear." In fact, he says, "It's the point that a hearing aid's not even going to help you." I'm like, oh, okay. So if you're ever talking to me and you think I'm ignoring you, there's that much chance that I am. Let's be honest. I might be ignoring you, but more than likely I'm not hearing you, especially if you're on my left side. And often I'll be kind of turned like this in order to hear better. When I go places with my wife, she's almost always on my right side, because it's real awkward to sit in church and she says something and I got to turn around and look at the back as she says it again because I didn't hear her. So there's all these tests that we get, right? There's a test of the emergency broadcast system. We all hear that one. This is a test of the emergency broadcast, and it's irritating. But the test is there to determine that everything is ready, everything is able to be used for its intended purpose. And so think back on your own life to something a long time ago for many of us. Some of us a really long time ago. Think back to your first bicycle. Right? Do you remember your first bicycle? I mean, my first bicycle, probably like many of you, it wasn't new. I don't know where it came from. It had been a learner for a lot of people, I think. But you know what? That didn't matter at all. Because that bicycle was my freedom. And I would ride that bike all the time. Whenever I could, I would be on that bike. I'd get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. And in Peru, we didn't have insulated houses. We didn't have glass on our windows. It was just screen. You could hear everything going on at the neighbors. I would get up, I would step out my back door, and I would yell, "Bobby, are you awake?" And Bobby would yell back, "Yeah, I'm coming." And he'd come down, we'd take off on our bicycles. And eventually our parents got tired of that and told us we had to quit yelling at each other at 6 in the morning. And so we started whistling for each other. And so I'd get up and I'd go, I can't even whistle anymore. And he would reply back with the same thing, and I knew that he was awake. And then he would come down, or vice versa. Maybe he would be the one to get me out of bed. And we would go and we would ride. But as you think back to the first time you had that flat tire. Interesting, I was working on this sermon, and yesterday I discovered that tomorrow is World Bicycle Day. Go figure. And so I got my bicycle down from the garage, and guess what? The tire's flat. Big surprise, right? But think to that, because when that tire is flat, the bike cannot be used for its intended purpose. Right? And you can't use it with a flat tire. And the disappointment that we had, I remember the disappointment I had. And so you've got this debate that you can put some air in it, but you don't know how long it's going to hold that air. And you put some air in it, and you go on a ride, and you get a couple miles from home, and it's flat again. And now what are you going to do? And so what you did is you took the tire off the bike, and you took the tube out of it. You had a tube, and you pumped some air into it, right? You have to test the tire, test the tube in this case. And so you take and you pump it up a little bit. And you try not to pop it. And you always think it's going to pop at some point, and it usually doesn't. And so you have your tire, and then you test it, right? You take a thing of water, and you put it in here, and you say, is it leaking somewhere? See, so far, so good. We're not leaking. So I can use this tube, maybe. And you go through, and you wash for bubbles. Is there any air leaking out of this thing? And then you hit a spot like that. And you say, this tube is damaged. This tube has a hole in it. And so you can't use it. It's not going to stay up. You try to figure out where that is. and then you forget, so you put it back in the water. And it's right there. And so that's kind of how these tests go. You want this thing to work so you can use it for its intended purpose. And it's the same with our spiritual lives. See, God gives us a test because He wants to make sure that we can be used for our intended purpose. He wants to make sure that the air stays in us till we get to the destination, so to speak. And sometimes we're here and we're going, God, I'm ready. I'm ready. Use me. Use me. I've been praying that you'd use me. And God's like, because you're only going to get me halfway there. I've got this job for you, and you're only going to get me part way there. I need to know that you're going to get me all the way there. And so He tests us to make sure that we're going to be capable of doing that. Because we need to be mature and complete. Right? God says, you can't do what I have for you until you are mature and complete. And so James writes, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. Because the testing or the trials that you face, the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Perseverance for the long haul, right? Something that preserves, something that is steadfast is another word that some translations use. It's there. It's going to be permanently. And when that happens, that perseverance, it says, let perseverance finish its work so you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. The translations, they'll say endurance or patience. And so it implies time, right? It implies the long haul. We don't preserve food that we're going to eat immediately. We preserve food that's going to be around for a while. That can of vegetables in your cupboard that has an expiration date on it. Really, it doesn't mean anything. As long as the can is intact, it's preserved. Right? It might taste a little different, might look a little different, but it's not going to hurt you because of the preservatives in there. But we don't need preservatives. We don't need to be patient if we live in a world of immediate gratification. Right? And that's what we like. We want it now. We want it now. But when we don't get those immediate results, that's when we're called to be patient, to preserve, or to endure. And endure, those all are long range things, right? Long time. If there is an endurance race, whether it's in motorsports or whether it's running, it's at least 24 hours. Now, someone can run a marathon in 3 hours, 4, 5, 6 hours, but an endurance race goes for 24 hours. It's designed to separate out the very best. Those designed to test the limits of what you can do. Weed out all but the best. And James writes that this perseverance, this endurance, this patience will make us mature and complete, not lacking in anything. And that part sounds good, right? Who doesn't want to be mature and complete and not lacking in anything? I'd sign up for that in an instant. The problem is getting there, right? And determining if we really are. Are we perfect and complete, or are we lacking? And the trials that we face help determine that. The context here is that these are not trials that we choose. I don't think there's probably very many trials that we choose. These aren't, James is not talking about simple inconveniences that we experience as humans. He's talking about trials that people encounter because of their loyalty to God. But those other trials, still, we learn from them. And we think about Job and all that Job went through, right? All the trials that Job went through because of his loyalty to God. But Job wasn't the only one. God tests all sorts of people. He tests all the time. In Deuteronomy, he said to be wary of false prophets. He says there's false prophets. He says, you must not listen to the words of the prophet or the dreamer. The Lord is testing you to find out whether you love him with all your heart and all your soul. So when we don't know if something is what we want, we test it. And God, he wants to test us. He tests us to make sure that, yes, we are all in. Yes, we are committed. Yes, we're not going to be distracted. I worked at a factory, and we generally would test about 5 out of every 1,000 parts that we made. We'd be running parts, and we would pull 5 out at random and test them to make sure that they were in spec, that they met the needs. But there were some critical applications where we would test every single part, because that part was used in such a way that if it failed, it would have disastrous consequences. And so we had to make sure that part met every spec. So every single part coming off the machine would be tested. And God tests us the same way. He wants to make sure that every one of us is capable of the job that he has for us. He's got different jobs for us, individually and as a congregation. And he tests us. And these trials that James is saying are oppression and persecution because of our convictions, right? They pose a threat to our faith. We wonder, are we going to be able to maintain our faith, our trust in him? But the thing is that when we do, that endurance, it creates a new facet in our lives that couldn't exist without the testing. The trials, they serve to develop us in new ways, to develop features in the believer's life that refine and shape our knowledge of his holy purpose. And so we read this sort of thing, and we want the end result without the process of getting there. We want to be used by God without knowing that we're actually going to be able to be used and not let him down. And so I look at this verse, and it's like, oh man, it's only one verse, but it's not. If we go to Romans chapter 5, Paul is saying that you're justified by faith and you have the peace of God. And then he says, not only so, he says, but so that we also glory in our suffering, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, character, and character hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. Sounds kind of like James, doesn't it? We suffer, we have trials, we're tested, and that leads to perseverance. We push through them. And that perseverance, then those trials give us character. The character gives us hope, which gives us maturity, so that the Spirit can do his work. Peter chimes in with essentially the same thing. In 1 Peter 6 and 7, he says, in all this, greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you've had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that the proven genuineness of your faith, of greater worth than gold, which persists even though refined by fire, may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. He says you have this great gift. You have the resurrection of Christ, and we celebrate that, but we're still going to go through trials. We're still going to be proven, but the end result is going to bring even more glory to God. And sometimes these trials, sometimes they get old, right? When you guys it's been, I think, about a year now that you haven't had a pastor. Is that right? The June of last year? It's been a year. You're like, why? Why is this taking so long? Maybe God is testing you. Maybe he's saying, I need you guys to build up a little bit. I need you to strengthen this character. Or maybe he's working on the prospective pastor and saying, hey, this guy here, he still needs to do some work. Right? I don't know. But we go through these things and we persevere. Right? We endure. We try to come out stronger. We try to learn from all of this. And sometimes we go through these tests and we fail. Right? We have some sort of test and we fail, and we look back and we think, man, I flubbed that up. I had an opportunity and I didn't take it. Maybe an opportunity to share Christ with someone and you didn't take it. Or maybe there's something that you said and I can't believe I said that. I cannot believe what was I thinking? Right? We all have these times where we feel like we fail. And maybe you should have said something, or maybe you shouldn't have said something. I don't know. But if you have regrets, you've learned something, right? If you have regrets, you've analyzed it, you've had that trial, and you've looked at it and you said, okay, I can learn from this. I can do better. I have this area where I didn't do what I want to do, so now I will try to strengthen myself and do better. But the process, it's tough, it's messy, it's not easy, but it's not fatal. You know, this tube, obviously, it leaks pretty good because it had air in it when I set it up here. And then it's got this hole in it somewhere. I really don't want to stick it back in the water. There. Right here is this hole. And so what do you do when you had this bicycle tube that had a hole in it? You found your little slime patch kit, classic patch kit, right? And you fixed the tube. And the first part of fixing that tube was always taking this lid off, and this lid looks like it was pierced by a whole bunch of nails. And this side is rough. It's sharp. And you take that and you rub it on the rubber. You rub it on that tube. You scour it up. You want to roughen it up to take off any dirt that could be there, to give good contact area for the glue. And then you find your glue, and you put a little bit of rubber cement on it. Whew. Sometimes you get a lot of rubber cement. You try to keep it off your hands because you're going to be touching other things. And you smear that around on there a little bit. And you put it back in there so you don't get it on something. And then you find your patch. You take it out of there. You find your patch that came in the kit. And I just got my finger in the rubber cement. This is going to be great fun going home today. Right? And you try to get that backing off. And I pre-peeled this thing beforehand to make sure it would work. There it comes. And God does the same thing to us. He takes us sometimes and has to rough us up a little bit. He roughs us up to get us clean. He wants to make sure that when he patches us up, that patch sticks. And so that patch is on there. Like I said, God operates the same way with us. But once this patch is applied, this tube is ready to go. It can be used for its intended purpose again. Right? There's two kinds of tubes. There's those that hold air and there's those that don't. It doesn't matter if they're patched. Right? If it holds air, it can fill its purpose. And it's the same with us. We can be beat up. We can be patched up. It doesn't matter. If we're patched, we can be used for our intended purpose. James says, let perseverance finish its work so you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. The tube is complete. It can be used. Right? Nobody knows, once you put it back in that tube, no one knows if it's been patched or not. As long as it holds air, it's good. And so this morning, if you feel like you failed and you can't be used, if you feel like you're not worthy of God, right? If you're not worthy to be his follower, man, come talk to me or talk to one of the elders. That's not the case. Right? God has a plan for every one of us individually, and he has a plan for us as a congregation. And he tests us to make sure that we're strong enough to do what he needs us to do. None of us want to get out there, and I said we don't like to fail. We definitely don't want to fail when God's calling us to do something. And so he tests us. He makes sure that we're going to be capable. We're going to be capable of doing what he wants us to do. And as he tests us, if we fail those tests, it's okay because the failure is not fatal. The failure just points out areas where we need to work. And then we go through the process again. And in all life, as we're being tested, whether it's with how we respond to people, whether it's problems, whether it's success, whether it's conflict, conflict, illness, disappointment, the weather, or whether it's persecution because of our faith, our response, how we respond, indicates the level of our maturity and our readiness to be used. And so that brings us back to where we started. The same verse that we started with is what I will end with this morning. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face various trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, lacking in nothing.